you, as since we're kind of got here at it, that's something that people use as an argument. But getting back into the rest of this now, the sound of a trumpet or a shofar was part of the Sinai theophany, according to Exodus. Now you may say, well, what's that mean? Well, Mount Sinai is where God dwelt, okay? Because where do you see God's dwelling? Mountain and gardens. And one of the places he would dwell on is Mount Sinai. In fact, when the Israelites were taken out and they approached Mount Sinai, Moses led them there to receive the law. And in fact, it was so holy that if anybody touched the mountain, they were struck dead. Moses went up, and there he gathered the 10 Commandments. Well, really the 9 words of God is what it really says, but it's okay. We all understand what it's the law. And so, the Sinai theophany, if you go back and you read it there in Exodus, and let me see if I can pull this up here real quickly. On the morning of the 3rd day, there were thunders and lightnings. Here we go. There were thunders and lightnings in a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. So all the people in the camp trembled. Again, we see this all throughout whenever we go into this, that when God usually presents himself, there's always some sort of cloud, there's lightning, there's the roar of thunder, there's this trumpet blast sounds to the people. And so basically it's essentially God announcing his presence upon them. Basically saying, look, I'm here. And in fact, when they built the tabernacle, you will see too that they had this cloud that was there and stuff. And when two of Aaron's sons rebelled and they went inside there arrogantly, they were struck down by it. It's the sort of idea of holiness here that's going in. But basically, John is in the presence now of God. He's right there in God's presence. He wants to make sure that you know that. No, I'm right here with God at this moment. The point is not that the voice in Revelation 4 is calling people back to the old covenant. This is Jesus. This is the risen Son of Man who is portrayed also as the Ancient of Days in Revelation 1. This is the risen Christ, the Lord, the one on the throne. He's basically trying to sit here and say, look, Christ is on the throne. He's reminding everybody, look here. Christ is the one in charge. Okay, Christ is God. Again, he's going to constantly remind us of this. He's the one in power. He's the one in rulership. He is the one in this. And remember, Christ is our mediator also. He is our mediator between God and us. Because what is a mediator? What's another word we use for mediator today? Lawyer, right? Yeah. Arguing our case. And so, and again, so we're getting this sort of idea going back to Mount Sinai here, a similar type of imagery. And again, this is coming up with those older covenants here of God appearing in this sort of type of imagery here. Because really like I just said, God has made a covenant between the church now and himself. And so now he's going to exact the judgment based on how things have played out. Kind of making a reference to this as well. So what would these Hellenistic Jews be thinking of too that this sounds very similar to? Well, if you're Greco-Roman, you're thinking of Athena and Zeus. It's like this. So no, that because in their mindset, in the Greco-Roman type of world, Zeus and Athena are always portrayed as having these sort of clouds around them, and they're coming down with thunder. There's thunder sounds, and Zeus is throwing lightning bolts and these things like this. But actually what John is pointing out here is he's telling these Hellenistic Jews and Greeks, look, it's not Zeus that has this power. It's not Zeus that controls this. It is the Lord God Yahweh. And again, they do this all throughout the Old Testament too. They do this with Baal. They do this with Marduk. They do this with other beings too. And we're going to get into some of that as well here. And they're always, John and all of them are always having to point out to these people, look, it's not these false gods. Because I tell you right now, I'm not going to be surprised when I die and I'm standing in the spiritual realm and there is some being that set himself up as Zeus and was being worshipped as that. And he thought, you know what, this is what God did, this is what Yahweh did. I'm going to try to do it myself too and make these people think I'm a God to worship. And then it's like, no, that's why I said they've stolen these ideas and God is reclaiming them. God is saying, no, I am the one that's in charge here. Nothing else is in charge. What do you think, Satan's the one that's like all hell's breaking loose? No, guys, this is the wrath of heaven. This is the wrath of heaven. Satan has no power over this. There is nothing. And so John's kind of pointing that out here. So let's kind of break some of these images down here. So basically we've got this idea now. We're standing in the presence of God. We understand that. And once I was taken in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, with one seated on the throne, and he who sat there had the appearance of jasper. This is iestis in Greek, and cardinian. This is sardium in Greek. And around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. This is what happens when I talk all day. Smaragdinus. So I want to talk about these gemstones here and what they mean. Now, the first two are also found in descriptions of New Jerusalem, which we'll get to later on in this. They're also used in the Septuagint. That's the Greek translation of the Old Testament for the tabernacle. If you go back and you read about the tabernacle, the way that they would adorn it, they would adorn it with certain jewels and certain imagery all throughout it. Because the tabernacle was to remind the people of being back in Eden, of being back in God's presence. But it was so holy that that's why they had to make atonements through sacrifices just to even get clean, to even stand before God. And so, again, this sort of, and if you don't realize that God's the one that designed the entire thing. He told Moses the size, the material, how to build everything, and how he wanted it to look. It was adorned with cherubim. It was adorned with an Ark of the Covenant. It had the altar of incense. It had the golden lampstand. It had other things too that all God made them decorate and adorn a certain way. And so basically here we're seeing essentially God using imagery here that's going to recall basically going back to the tabernacle or the temple here, because it's to remind everybody that, hey, this was God actually there. It was actually God being with his people. And here now we have, again, God with his people, except now we're actually in his realm, the spiritual realm, not here in the physical realm. And again, it also goes back to the geography of the garden, Genesis 2:12 there. Throne scenes in Jewish apocryphic literature do not usually use precious stones as metaphors for describing the throne of God. Ezekiel 1 mentions several precious stones and metals in some angelic epiphanies. Precious stones can be used in descriptions. If you go to Daniel, where gold, beryl, and burnished bronze are used to describe the girdle, the body, and the legs of an angel. We've kind of seen this a little bit already early on here. Feet of bronze, things such as this. They were all to show a sense of either authority or just a sense of purity, of reflection of God's light, of some sort of holiness, some sort of. There's something about them that makes them very pure or precious. To a certain extent, John uses the precious stones drawn from the description of the heavenly Jerusalem, describing God and his throne. These three precious stones are used in the throne scene in the description of New Jerusalem. So we have jasper, cardidian. Again, these are the verses here from later on when we get into whenever the New Jerusalem comes down here towards the end of the book. We will see that the makeup of New Jerusalem mimics exactly what God's throne room looks here. Again, because if we go there at the very end, not to kind of ruin the surprise for anybody, but God comes back down and he dwells with us. He's back down here with us, and he has his throne here, and he's with us, and there's his kingdom with us. And so essentially his heavenly realm will mimic what his earthly realm will look like at the end. Because we are now joined back together. If you think of, again, the garden, if you think of it like a Venn diagram, it's this overlapping of where heaven and earth met at. And that's where God was. And then if we go to the rainbow here, that also has an Old Testament president. Can anybody guess where? That's right. Ezekiel 1:27. Because that's probably not the place that you would think about when you think of a rainbow, right? Well, I'm kind of playing with you here a bit, but. And upward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw, as it were, gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire, and there was brightness around him. Now, some of you are like, well, wait a minute, it didn't say the word rainbow anywhere in that whole thing. Well, okay. Think of an arch. Now, you say the word around him. I'm sure most of you think like, oh, it's on the floor, like circling him. But again, if it's arching, is it not also all around him? Mm-hmm. If I put light behind you, is the light not going around you? Is it not, arching over you? I mean, it's all around you, right? It's not just at your feet, lighting your feet. No, it's all around. And the Septuagint word for rainbow in Ezekiel 1:28, toxin, is not the word in Revelation. So you're sitting there going, well, what are you doing, Tyler? Are you wasting our time? No. But the reiteration of cherubim throne vision in Ezekiel 10 does use this word. So the connection back to Ezekiel's vision is legit. So what it's basically saying here is this. You will see this word actually being used in the throne rooms actually around God's throne as well. But you're probably thinking of the rainbow as it is in Genesis 9:3, right after the flood, right? Yes, you are correct to think that. You are correct to think that. But people are short-sighted about this. This is the short-sightedness that you will not get out of a lot of Revelation commentaries. Because think about it. What was the rainbow?
Promise. It was a promise.
Yeah. Just as the rainbow was a sign of the promise that I am not going to destroy all the life on earth again, this idea here might signal to the readers of Revelation, it's going to get really bad, but God isn't going to destroy everyone. The righteous will be saved, and so on, and so forth. It might take their minds back to the flood of Genesis and gives them some hope as well. Because God was going to flood the whole world, right? Screw man, I'm done with them. But there was what?
One righteous.
There was one righteous man, Noah, right? There was a remnant. That's a big theme you will see all throughout the Old Testament. There's always a remnant. There's always those that God spares. There's always those that go back to Sodom and Gomorrah. He pulled Lot out of there. He goes, I don't know I can't speak for God. I don't know what would happen if Noah just thought rain. What is rain? What are you talking about, rain? What? Boat. You expect me to spend over 100 years building a boat? Boat. I can't tell you why God would do, but God will force his hand, his will. It's like, no, this is my will. And so there's always a remnant. He always saves people. Even whenever the Israelites were taken into bondage, there was a remnant. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, Esther. There's always a remnant. No matter how mad God gets. Guys, let's face it. He destroyed all mankind, but he spared one family. One man and his family. And he's bringing that back up here. Look, God's already destroyed the world once through water. Believe me, there's plenty of other ways to destroy the world. But guess what? There will be a remnant. And so basically the rainbow as a theme or sign of the covenant. Remember, this is a covenant. This is a promise. I will not do this again. I will not do it this way again. He's making a promise, a covenant between us. And here we're seeing God keep his promise. Guess what? It's about to get really bad, but I promise you not everyone will be destroyed. Will you destroy the righteous with the unrighteous? No, I will not, Abraham. Fine, go find 40. Fine, go find 20. Fine, go find 10. You know, he just doesn't. He's like, no, I'm not that type of person. I am a just God, but I'm a merciful God. The sign of the rainbow is a reminder that God will not destroy all flesh. There will be a surviving remnant. He has made a covenant to that effect, and he will not forget it. The council will judge rightly in the end. God's enemies will be destroyed forever, but his children will not. They will not suffer the second death. Yeah, are you going to suffer the first death? Sure, okay. I mean, okay. Guess what? You're not going to suffer the second death. They will become citizens and rulers at the end of days in God's house in the New Eden. That's what he's making the promise here for. And again, we've already seen this throughout the 7 churches. Now let's get on to the next bit here. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders clothed in white garments with golden crowns on their head. From the throne came flashes of lightning, from the rumblings and pearls of thunders. Yes, I read all that. So let's go and take now the storm and earthquake elements of that. Now if we go a little bit, kind of do a little peekaboo here with Revelation 85, there's a reference to thunder and rumbling and lightning and an earthquake. And again, in Revelation, again in 11:19, we're going to come up with this again of lightning and rumbling of thunder. Again, this is just God announcing his presence. Okay, this is God at work. Now, there is these 7 fires around the throne. Now, in Judaism, angels are made of fire. You will see that often be a descriptor for them. They are fiery. They are the bright ones. They are the shining ones. 7 angelic beings are referred to here. Are the 7 blazing torches that represent the menorah. Again, we've already seen this in chapter 1. I will take your angel from you. I will take your lampstand from you. I will take this from you. And again, even in your apocryphic literature, too, you will see this also being referenced there too. So it's very clear that in Judaism, they always saw angels as being fiery beings. I mean, we already seen them as stars. What are stars? They're bright balls of light. I mean, okay, so can they not be fiery too? Sure. But if you want a really kind of a familiar story, look at Exodus 3, the burning bush, right? We have the pillar of fire. We have in Deuteronomy 33:2, even though there were some textual issues, here we get this either as fiery law or the fire associated with the multitude of the heavenly host at Sinai giving the law. Again, it's not unusual for God to have an entourage. Okay? He came and dined with Abraham, and there's 2 others with him. We see cherubim hanging outside the houses in some stories while God's doing whatever. It's not unusual. And in fact, go back to Sodom and Gomorrah. The men come. We want those men. What do? They blinded them. Struck them blind with their light. I mean, that's one thing Hollywood gets light when they show angels, like their eyes turn all wide and they like, oh, yeah, okay, that's, yeah. They basically show their true form, all right? You have, so yeah. And again, in Psalms 104:4, he says, he makes his messengers winds, his ministers a flaming fire. Yeah, so it's not unusual to see angels being representation as fires. Again, you go to the burning bush story, we see the angel of the Lord, right? But then it's God speaking, right? Well, what is it? Which is it? Well, it's both. And come to find out, well, let me actually, since we talked about keys of death and Hades, I don't know if I want to run the surprise right now. Who is the angel of death? Okay. I'll get to that here after a while then. Let you, it might shock you, but the Jews clearly know who it was. So if you look at the creatures that surround the throne in Revelation here, on the surface there are the cherubim from Ezekiel 1. But there's sort of a bit of a conundrum here with that because in Ezekiel, here the wings are numbered 6, but in Ezekiel 1, that's not exactly the same detail we have. The cherubim have 4 wings there. So 6 count actually comes from Isaiah. And in Isaiah 6, when he's looking at them, he has it as the seraphim. Now, what are the seraphim? We're going to learn about those. I got a Bible video over that tonight we're going to watch. But here's the interesting thing about seraphim. Do you know what seraphim actually translates to? Serpents. What was it that visited Adam and Eve? It was a seraphim. It was a seraphim. That's why whenever you get these skeptics and these people that want to mock the Bible, oh yeah, there's talking angels. Okay, it's just like Aesop's fables. It's not. It's a seraphim. It's a seraphim, people. Okay? But here, when Isaiah is actually looking upon the throne room, he's seeing them as snakes with wings. Okay. They're also known as the brightened ones, or the burning ones, too. So in Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10, the cherubim are not said to have eyes, or to be full of eyes. The eyes are the things. The eyes and the things full of the eyes are the wills. So if we go here, we're looking at this this will analogy here of having, because Ezekiel's having this sort of really trippy. Well, there's this sort of trippy vision he's having here of God on this throne, and there's these wills and these eyes of these wills. And if you watch the History Channel, they will tell you that these are actually aliens in the Bible. Yeah, there's some really crazy things out there about that. But anyhow, the wills have eyes. The wills are full of eyes, not the cherubim. But in Revelation 4, the term is living creatures. He doesn't actually call them cherubim here. Now in Ezekiel 1, and again, I'm going to talk more about this when we actually get, because this will thing is actually going to come back more into play in the next chapter. So I don't want to get too much bogged down into that, because we're going to talk about that next classroom. But again, that's essentially what do wills do? They move things, right? It's a symbolic thing of God being on the move. All right, he's on the move. But eyes all around. Well, let me put it this way. You probably tell this to your kids. I've got eyes in the back of my head, right? What are you trying to say? I see everything you do. I see everything you do. It's the same idea here. God sees all. But again, as we see here, God also purposes angels to go out and to be essentially watchers. They're to go out and report back. We go back to Job, right? He calls them back in, and he's like, "What have you guys been up to? What have you guys seen?" And he gets the reports from them, even though he knows, but he gives them jobs to do. Here, go do these jobs, right? Have you not seen Job? Have you not seen Job? Anybody seen Job? Right? It's this idea. Now, this is, okay, I want to tell you a quick story here. When I was little, like in elementary school, little like kindergarten, first grade, that type of age, my parents made me stay at my grandmother's house. She lived down the street from Southwood, and I hated it. I hated spending summers there. My grandmother did Avon, and it was nothing but watching essentially a lot of television, and she had her shows, and no, not so much that, but no, it was like In the Heat of the Night and Rockford Files and things like that. But anyhow, so it was not the most fun place, and so my cousins would come over there, and they were older than me, and they would go, and Grandpa had to take the paper. You got to take the paper so you know what's going on in the world. So they took the paper. Well, my cousins, of course, you can always tell a lot about a person by what they first turn to in a paper. For my grandparents, a lot of times it was the obituary. Who died? Anyhow. So, my cousins, however, you know what they would turn to? The horoscope page. And so I had no idea about any of this stuff. And I'm walking in there, and they're telling me, and they're about like 2 or 3 years older than me. Well, one's 5 years older and one's 2 years. And so they go, "Tyler, when's your birthday?" I was like, "December 26th. They're like, "Oh, I forget even what they told me I was." And I was like, "I am?" And I'm like 6 years old. I have no idea what they're talking about. They're like, "Yeah, it says here you're going to da-da-da-da-da." I'm like, "How do you know that?" I was just confused. My grandmother heard what they were doing, and she goes, "You better get out of that Stop reading that stuff. That is Satan worshiping right there. That is satanic stuff right there. Don't you be reading that stuff and getting that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking like, and she's like yelling at them. She's not really getting so much on me. But my mouth's open. I'm thinking like, wasn't that your paper? Just like this. I'm thinking like, what's the deal here? I had no idea about this type of stuff. But this might shock you. So here's your shocking moment for the night. Did you know that the Jews used the zodiac system? Now some of you are like, now if you're like my grandmother, they did not practice Satanism, they did not. Well, what is the zodiac system? Well, okay, let me put it this way. Yeah. The Jewish nation split. The northern kingdom was wicked, and eventually the southern kingdom was wicked. And eventually who came in? Babylon, right? Took them away. Babylon developed the astrological zodiac system. Now, I know people get all when you talk about this, but it's actually a pretty good system. Because ultimately, really what it is, it's a timekeeping calendar. And believe it or not, every one of you in here still uses it today. But you may just not realize it. Kind of like how you name all your months after Roman gods, or Greek emperors, or your planets, things like that. Anyhow, so of course they're in captivity, and a lot of them being educated. Daniel's being educated. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are being educated. Well, they're sitting there learning, hey, here's a very good way of keeping time. Because how often do you look up at the sky and go, hey, did you realize that all the stars went out? No. No. It's not like your electricity goes out. You go out there and there they are, right? And guess what? They realized here is a way of mapping out time and dating things and putting things like this. We still use these type of systems today. And so basically, what is going on here too, we're going to see, is that John's repurposing this as well. He's going to use this, and the Jews use this all throughout it, and eventually in comes also the Greeks, right? And guess what? They advance it even further. Now, the key is this though. They were not using it to say that the stars determine their fate. But they knew it was like, hey, here's a really great calendar system. And if you don't realize that the Jews still have a different calendar system than what we do, we use the Gregorian. They don't. The Jews don't use that. Now they kind of will for business because America uses Gregorian, but anyhow. But their point is this. They were not using it to say, oh, the stars determine our fate. No, they are basically saying here, God determines your fate. But they realized this. Because for the Babylonians, they worshiped Marduk. The Jews are saying, no. And John's going to make this very clear. No. God's in control of time. And what he's basically about to do here is he's basically about to say, now's the time. He's setting the time. And I'll give you guys a bit of a foreshadowing here. Because you might sit there and go, well, this is just complete heresy. Okay, let's go to the nativity story. There was these men who were seeking out a baby. We call them what? Wise men. And where did these wise men come from?
The East.
From the former Persian Empire, which was the former Babylonian Empire, which still kept all this. And because they had writings from certain men that were in captivity there, namely Daniel and his prophecies, and they were looking up at those things up in the sky and saying, oh, look, there is a sign. And what is that sign we like to put on top of some of our Christmas trees? A star. A star shining in the night, right? Yeah. And they followed the star, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Bible itself, Christ's own birth, is using an astrological thing here to bring these men in. Now, some actually would argue actually the star is an actual angel leading them. Because stars and angels go synonymous. So maybe God recognizes, hey, these pagans here, send one of you guys on down there. You guys are pretty good at being stars. Go down there and shine like a star. Move. Here's this star moving, right? It's taking them. And if you guys don't realize it, they were not at the birth of Jesus. They came much later. Okay, so I don't want you don't have to throw out your nativity scenes if you got wise men. But just in case you're ever on Jeopardy. But anyhow, they're using this. And in fact, kind of speed us up here because I know I'm about to get my warning here soon. Stars and constellations, of course, mark time. God is on his throne. It's going to be the Lamb. The Lamb's going to be part of this. We have the risen Christ described as the ancient days, who is Daniel. Yeah. So we get that. Who's in control of that? God, Christ, the Lamb, the Son of Man, the ancient days. Yeah, all of it. It's all in control of time. God is in control of time. God is not bound by time. He controls time. I know we can't understand it, just like Joey goes off about, in the beginning, oh, can you comprehend that? Okay. Well, guess what? You know why? Because God was there before there was ever time. Before time ever was set. How is time set? Well, let me point it to this way. You guys all do this today. What is that big bright thing in the sky?
Sun.
And the sun is a what?
Star.
And we determine our time based on, right? Even though we're moving, we still use this terminology, right? It's sun.
Right.
And it's suns. We do it ourselves. Yeah, people get all so when you say anything about any zodiac stuff, I don't know, maybe they think back to the 60s serial killer cult, so I don't know. But
Easter is, that's why Easter moves on too,
Mhm.
based on the moon cycles. That's right.
Yep. Easter's going to come into play here with something. And so will Christmas. I'll give you guys, I've been keep biting my lip on this. Do you realize that Revelation tells you when Christmas actually happened? We're going to have a class about that right before Christmas. But anyhow, it involves this. Yeah, you don't think John and them were walking around with Jesus this whole time and didn't ask when he was born? We just don't understand it because we're just not Jewish. But anyhow, so again, where did I put that? I wanted to kind of just... yeah, here it is. In fact, whenever you go to ancient synagogues, when they dig them up, this is what they find in there. Mosaics of all of them. Mosaics of the zodiac system. It's not, oh my, it's a calendar, people. It's a farmer's almanac. There's a time for this, there's a time for this. Well, guess what? Here's a great way of knowing the time. I mean, that's what it is. Okay, don't be like my grandmother and just start having a tissy fit.
The prediction part.
Yeah. I mean, it's a calendar system, people. But anyhow, yeah. But let's get to this 24 thing really quick here. So we have the 24 elders here. Who are they? What are they? Well, there's been a lot of speculation. You get a bunch of different commentators. You're going to get a bunch of different ideas. But again, elders is basically depicted as two ways before Yahweh. Basically, we have Moses bringing the elders up with him, so they're actually human beings, people that were elders who took care of the cities or tribes before Saul came about when they were wanting a king. So you had this eldership too, but you also had elderships being also description of the heavenly host, people that were there. Because think about it, what is an eldership? Well, Jeremy's an elder, right?
Right.
I mean, Jeremy doesn't look exactly like, we say elderly, he doesn't quite look elderly, right? We kind of have this term of thinking old and decrepit or older whatever. But really, elder is just a sense of a place of sort of counsel, that's really what they do. Think about what Jeremy's job is with Joey. He's basically there to be a council member, essentially, a board member, you want to call it, or something like that. And so we have these 24 elders, and a lot of people, but throughout there, you go to any commentaries, and you're going to get one of these things. You're going to see that they're stars, they're angels, they're Old Testament saints. They're these heavenly representatives of the saints. So, I'm Michael, and I'm here to represent all the people. They're like a congressman. Like, I'm Michael, and I'm here to represent all these saints here. And I'm Gabriel, and I'm here to represent all these saints here. You know, it's like that. The other one, they see him as actually being the patriarchs, so the actual 12 tribe members, and also the 12 apostles. Put that together, you get 24. Good math, all right. I just wonder how they deal with Judas. I don't know if they just say, well, no, it's actually Paul, not Judas. I don't know. But anyhow, and then there's also another idea is that they represent the 24 books of the Old Testament. Now some of you are going, well, no, hold on, there's not 24 books. Well, if you go back to the original text, there's only one king. There's only one king's book. There's only one chronicle. You know, we have first and second. No, there's actually one. They actually just, if you go to the Jews, they're like first kings and second kings. You mean kings? I mean chronicles, right? Yeah, they just put them. It's one deal. So they combine a lot of those books into different things there. Now, really, actually, I would say that most of these are kind of really the only ones that really anybody really much hangs. And this is over the history of all this stuff. I mean, a lot of these have disappeared, but really, angels, the patriarchs, those are really the two main ones anymore today that you'll see anybody commenting or kind of going with. And again, we haven't, again, if you go back to this and you don't think that, well, these people are involved in any kind of way with any kind of deal, go to 1 Kings 22. And if you read here, and Micah said, therefore hear the Lord, the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne and all the hosts of heaven standing beside him, and on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab, you know, the wicked king Ahab, that he will go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead, and one said one thing and another said another. So they're talking. The council's talking amongst itself. Then the Spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, "I will entice him." So one of the spirits of the council members here says, "I'll do it. I'll do it." And the Lord said to him, "By what means?" And he said, "I will go out and will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets." And he said, "You are to entice him, and you shall succeed, and go out and do so. Now therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in his mouth, and all these your prophets, and the Lord has declared disaster for you." So yeah, these heavenly council people they're around God, and they're doing work. And God's saying, "Okay, who wants to do that?" I said, "Yeah." Who wants to do this? And we're going to see this. You're about to get to the judgments, and who's about to show up? Heavenly host members carrying out deals. Okay? They're carrying them out. Go back to Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot, get out of here so we can get to work. Get out already. No, they just kept, well, can we do it tomorrow? Can we get this guy? How about this guy? Oh, da, da, da. Finally, they basically literally were kicking him in the butt, dragging him out. I mean, they drug him out of there. And it's like, get out of here, we got work to do. So, the elders suggest that basically these are actually supernatural council members, not actual human beings. Now, will we eventually become a part of this? Yes, but not yet. Not yet. There will be a time when we will. Are we in God's presence? Yes, we are. Hebrews 12, verses 22, "But you have come to Mount Zion and the city of the living God, and the heavenly Jerusalem, to the innumerable angels and festival galleries, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect." So yes, you will be part of this, yes. But these members right here, this is not, hey, look, there's John, and there's Paul. Look, they're going to go down here, and they're going to do this. No, God's already got his people. He's had them already from the very get-go. They've been doing things throughout the Old Testament. They're going to do things right here in Revelation. And really, I mean, is there any reason you need to really pick? Oh, is it the glorified righteous or is it the divine council members? Yes. Again, yes. All the answers are yes. Yes, it's both. It's fine, yes. Glorified righteous, divine council members? Yes. Potato, potato. Again, if you want to be curious about that, there's another book here. I'm going to email you to the Ascension of Isaiah. It's another apocryphic book if you're not afraid of reading those things. But here we get this morning star phrase again about this. And we've talked about the morning star, about Jesus again. Shining stars, things like this from Daniel language. The 24 elders. But there's one last thing I want to set you with here. Okay. We're dealing with Hellenistic Greeks, right? The Hellenistic Greeks came up with the 360-degree system. What is the instrument that they came up with to keep time? A sundial. They had a sundial. And how many notches are on a sundial? 24. They would use a 24-hour system. They would have these, because let me explain. This is kind of how our clock is fashioned today, an old-fashioned clock, okay, like the hand thing. It's based off the sun, but it had these notches on it. And essentially the 24 thing here is also representation because they're around the throne room. And it's essentially like that. It's like the imagery of a sundial. It's the imagery of, guess what, we're here. It's time to set the time. And you can just imagine God's like, go. You go drop this bowl. You go drop this bowl. You go light this trumpet. You're doing this trumpet. You see what I mean? He's gathering them together, and he's setting the time, and each one of them has an appointed time to go out and to carry out this. And finally, if you don't believe this, then does this sound similar? We have a 24-hour day, 360 divisible by 60 minutes. We get all this. We use this today as our system. But you don't, the 24 hours, yeah, they're supernatural beings, glorified, I already said that. But here's the last bit. Jesus himself even points this out. Remember, the Greeks conquered Israel under Alexander the Great. They were under Hellenistic rule until the Romans came in, and guess what? The Romans aren't going to throw out a good thing. They just like adopting stuff. And here is John in his own gospel. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. He's pointing out right there, the Jews are using the Hellenistic timekeeping system of 24 hours. And Christ is already pointing out, there's 12 hours in a day. He's basically already saying, look, here we go. It's right here. We set it up. It's the end of days. It's the Ancient of Days is setting up. God's on his throne. He's calling his members together. It's time to go, guys. The time is now. We've got our things set up. We're going to go. Here's the game plan. And that's what John's basically doing here. He's basically showing that it's God on his throne. He's in control the whole time. He's dictating everything. He's set the time for everything. His judgment's going to come about. But guess what? If you're with him, you're going to be okay. There will be a remnant, and you will be before him in his throne, part of his membership. That's the overarching thing. I could sum it up in like 2 minutes instead of spending 2 months. But that's it. That's what all this represents. The promise, the remnant, the time. Well, I was going to do this real quickly to show you. Let me see if I can get it out.
And I still have a lot of questions about the bad ones.
Well, great. Let's talk about the Satan and demons in the story of the Bible. So let's start in the beginning. In Genesis 1, God creates a beautiful, ordered reality out of darkness and disorder so that life can flourish. He appoints humans as his representatives to rule over all of it, and 7 times God calls it good.
Yeah, I experienced that kind of goodness often in things like beauty and truth, love and generosity.
But in Genesis 3, we meet a creature who's in a state of rebellion against his creator. We're not told yet why or how he rebels, but he's on a mission to ruin God's good world for other creatures.
This thing is trouble.
Yeah, this creature is the Bible's first portrait of evil. It distorts what God has purposed for good, ruining and dragging creation back into darkness and disorder.
So the humans join the spiritual rebel, which leads them back into chaos and death.
And from this point on, the human rebellion is interwoven with a spiritual rebellion. And the biblical story shows how this happens over and over again.
Okay, but wait, we're getting all this from a slithering snake?
Well, there are clues in the story that it's more than just a snake. Remember, Eden is a high place where the earth and its creatures overlap with heaven and its creatures.
So this snake could be a spiritual being.
Well, Genesis 3 points in that direction, and then later biblical authors fill in the picture. Like when the prophet Isaiah has a vision of God's heavenly throne room, he's surrounded and being praised by the spiritual beings.
Yeah, these are the cherubim around God's throne.
But when Isaiah sees these creatures, he describes them as seraphim, which in Hebrew means snake.
Ah, so the snake is like a
to be God.
All right, that's the same temptation the snake puts before Adam and Eve.
Exactly. He says they could rule the world like God, but by their own wisdom.
So they're all kicked out of the garden.
Yeah, God says this rebel will now crawl on its belly.
Where does it go after this?
Well, the biblical authors offer subtle clues where this being is at work behind the scenes, animating division and hatred between humans. They also use a variety of images to describe this being. It's a snake, or a sea dragon, or a dark desert creature, or the king of death and the grave. He's also given many titles, like Tempter, or the Evil One, or the Devil, which in Greek means the slanderer.
But his name is Satan, right?
Actually, no. Satan is not a name. It's another one of these titles, which is why in Hebrew it has the word the in front of it. The Satan means the adversary, because he isn't for anything. Rather, he's anti-everything, working through lies to drag us back into darkness and disorder.
That's intense. Now, what about these other spiritual rebels in the Bible called demons? What are they all about?
Okay, so remember the concept of God's heavenly staff team, the divine council, or the sons of God. In the Hebrew scriptures, we're told that some of these rebelled too.
When did that happen?
Multiple times, actually. After the snake comes the rebellion of the sons of God in Genesis 6. We're told that they have sex with women, who then give birth to violent warrior kinds.
Oh, right. The Nephilim. These are probably the strangest characters in the whole Bible.
Well, strange from your point of view, but ancient readers knew exactly what was going on. The ancient kingdoms around Israel claimed to be founded and protected by giant warrior kings who were part human, part God, and filled with divine wisdom.
Ah, I see. So the biblical authors are saying, hey, those warrior kings, they shouldn't be honored.
Right. In this story, they're portrayed as human rebels who are captive spiritually, spreading their violence in God's good world.
Yet one of those kings in Genesis 10 goes on to build the city of Babylon.
Yes, Nimrod, whose name sounds like the Hebrew word for rebel. And his kingdom leads to the next rebellion, where humans exalt themselves in Babylon.
But God scatters that rebellion.
And when Moses in Deuteronomy looks back at that story, he says that's the moment when God handed over the nations to worship the rebel host of heaven, the gods of money, sex, and military power. Moses is the first one to call them demons, that is, lesser spiritual beings.
So demons are spiritual forces at work behind corrupt human power structures.
Yes, but in the Bible they also work on the personal level, animating and exploiting humanity's greed and selfishness, as well as the weakness of our mortal bodies. In the Bible, spiritual evil is at work in anything that drags God's good creation back into chaos, darkness, and death.
So this is why when Jesus arrives on the scene, he said his primary enemy is not human.
Right. Jesus and his first followers viewed all the pain and suffering in God's good world as a sign of its captivity to death and spiritual evil.
But they didn't think this was the end of the story.
Right. Jesus knew that the only way out of this cosmic ruin is to overcome evil and death itself, even if it costs everything.
So that helps you out a little bit with the last week's or last class. Let's deal with this list. But yeah, essentially demons are just the Nephilim. They're the spirits of the Nephilim. Back in Revelation 1, 17, and 18 with 3:7 again about the keys of David, the keys of death and Hades. I mentioned a few books here that used for study here on these. And again, just going through a bit of it here with, we talked a little bit about the Canaanite reference to keys and death and stuff with that, and basically the way in which the Bible both can look at death as a location, but also in a personification type manner to where they give actual human qualities to death. And again, honestly, I don't really care if you think death is a real actual being or not. I mean, the Bible portrays him both as being a location, but also as an actual being that comes in, that is in existence, that has qualities, that does things. It's large appetite. It's just it's always consuming. It's has features like hands and all types of other types of things here. It does things like terrorizes, kills, consumes, crushes, speaks. And again, I gave you guys all these references to Bible verses here that use it, as well as others talking about with Sheol and Hades also being personified, because the Greeks both also, for the Greeks, Hades was also a location, but it was actual being as well, and how the New Testament writers were essentially doing the same kind of thing as personifying death, as being not just a place where you go, but also as an actual being that carries out. Ultimately, it's under God's control. God controls life and death. And again, you see this all throughout medieval and Renaissance, and even somewhat modern day imagery of death being an actual being that goes about carrying out a job of collecting souls and bringing them into the afterworld. For the Jews, they call it Sheol, but in the New Testament, it's Hades. And again, we kind of looked a little bit about the sort of Greek way of how the New Testament writers take a lot of this deal of how the Greek, because again, remember, John's writing to Hellenistic Jews and Greeks, so they would understand this culture and this mythology, but applying it to Yahweh. And you'll see this all throughout, really. You see this actually all throughout the entirety of the Bible, really. You may not realize it, because if you're not familiar with the pagan cultures that the Israelites are having to deal with, they always like to take their stories, but then turn it into saying, no, Yahweh is the one who's in control of this, or who is this, or is that. But as we know, there are malevolent beings out there that have set themselves up as gods for these pagan nations too, that have taken sort of these personifications of Yahweh, these qualities of Yahweh, and claim to themselves have been to be these things. And you see this too also in apocryphic literature too. So your Second Temple deals as well. So I mean, it's not just in the Old Testament, it's also in the Second Temple literature, it's also in the New Testament literature. You see all throughout different inscriptions of early church books of death, fighting like Michael and so forth, and there's sin. I mean, this is actually taken from Milton's Paradise Lost, which is a 17th century novel, English novel, about death and sin coming into the world with Satan, that they were essentially his offspring. And again, so we have a lot of this right here that we went through and talked about. But then we get into this idea of the keys here. And this also has illustrations with the Greeks themselves too, because as we see here, no actual, that there is actually a being in the Greek mythology that is accredited with actually holding the keys to the underworld, and that's Hecate. You might actually know better in the words of Artemis or Diana, but those are all different names for them. And essentially, in their mythology, she holds the keys to Hades here, and you see kind of a statue that they have of her. In fact, kind of looks a lot like the model actually used for the Statue of Liberty. But in this one thing, she's also known as holding the keys here to it. And again, she's also known as like the mother of all things. For she's given all these qualities of it. But what we see here again is actually John using actually this writing of the Greek mythology and saying, no, it's actually God who holds these keys, not your pagan god, obviously. And again, but interesting enough, if we actually go into the Old Testament, and we actually look at the passages that's being used here in Revelation, they actually have somewhat of a progression of it. Christ came to earth, he died, and he rose again, and now he holds the keys to death and Hades. So there's a progression there to it. And so you ask yourself, well then who had the keys before him? Well, actually in a lot of your Old Testament literature, angels were assigned as holding keys to things. They actually, in fact, all throughout Jewish literature, certain angelic beings, and I use that term kind of a little loosely there, I mean they're like archangels and stuff, actually are said to actually be rulers or basically to have some sort of guardianship or some sort of control over certain aspects of creation. And in fact, if you actually go, and I mean the Jews actually had many, we kind of know like three of them. We know Lucifer, we know Gabriel and Michael. But actually, if you go read a lot of the Jewish texts, they actually have many angels. Many angels. Metatron, Ioli, Uriel, as well as others too. And if you go through Enoch there, in Enoch, he engages with several of the angels and meets with them, and they are talking about, they're going about doing their jobs for God. They're about, like, they're overseeing certain things. And so they basically are said to basically, and one of the angels is actually said to basically be, is in charge of basically keeping everything contained in the pit, in the underworld. And actually that's going to come into play later on with John, one of John's visions he's actually going to have of this. And so, again, but what we see now is that since Christ essentially conquered death, he now holds the keys to it. Now that's not to say that God does not control all things. He does control all things. It's just that basically what we're saying here is that Christ is basically the one who can essentially, through faith in Christ alone, is the determination of basically where you go in the afterworld. It's where you end up at. And we talked about this with our death, Sheol, Hades, hell, Tartarus, these type of terminologies. And basically, we get into this idea basically of, well, where did people go when they die? Well, they went to Sheol. Okay, what is Sheol? Well, not much is known about it. It's the realm of the dead. It's kind of described as being silent or dark because we don't have a lot of geographic information. We can't point it out. Like if I was to ask one of you, hey, what's Hawaii like? You can sit here and tell me things in Hawaii. Well, they didn't have quite a geographic location. And really, we don't really, I mean, it's really difficult to try to put the spiritual realm into a geographic type of, people try to do this all the time. You see a lot of medieval artwork, Renaissance artwork, a lot of these things go to Catholic churches, you'll see a lot of it. They try to put these things in realms, and these, like, they look like floating islands and whatever, and here's hell over here, and here's heaven up here, and they're floating around, there's this, it's like, no. But essentially, basically, that Christ was the one who through his death, allowed people to come back to the presence of God. And in all honesty, heaven is really kind of just a holding spot for us. It really is. It's not our home. I get so sick and tired. I remember one of these old Gaither homecoming deals from, like, I don't know, when the women had the beehive haircuts, and she's up there and she's singing, "Heaven is our home," or whatever. I just remember, and I was like, no. Heaven's not our home, but it's a kind of for us, that is our holding place. And so, to be in the presence of the Lord. And so the discussion really here is, well, where did people go before Christ's death? Well, really, in all honesty, there is no reason they couldn't have just gone with the Lord. Because how did Enoch and Elijah just get special treatment and get to go? And not only that, if you go to Hebrews, so basically, well, I'm kind of summing up what I just had all here, but you guys have the notes. That's kind of what but yeah, we talked about this, that Christ ascended into Sheol. He went to take on death. No, he did not go to hell. Hell's a new kind of a King James construct, okay? It's taken from the Norse pagan mythology. He went essentially to go tell those rogue beings that are locked up there, I've conquered. You thought you could kill me. Your whole plan was, hey, can we kill this guy? That's what Satan was fishing for. Whenever he's trying to ask him about, will the angels catch you? Will this happen? He says, guess what? You thought you beat me, you thought you killed me. You didn't. And again, guys, we give Lucifer and all them too much credit. They are not omniscient beings. Okay? They're just as limited as what we are. Now, are they probably more clever and smarter than we are? Yes, because they've been around a lot longer. They know how to mess with people and they know how to do things. But they're not all-knowing. And God's been playing out the game plan for centuries to them, and they fell for it still. And he's like, yeah, hey, hello, I'm supposed to die. Remember, he was even telling Peter, and Peter's like, oh, no, Lord, get you behind me, Satan. I mean, he's basically, Peter, I've already dictated it. It's been dictated for thousands of years. Go back to Adam and Eve. Okay? And so basically, he's basically mocking them and saying, look, you thought you could stop me. You can't stop us. All hell can't stop me now. And so he goes there to basically do that, but a lot of people take this as, oh, he went there and he took Abraham and all these souls out of hell and brought them to heaven. No, he didn't. And essentially the last bit, I mean, and really this goes in, everybody knew this. It's just that essentially you sort of had this rift going on, but when the Reformation happened, and I'm trying to think of a more pleasant term to use, but they basically got into a big contest over who's got the biggest between Luther, Calvin, and the Reformers in the Roman Catholic Church. And they were basically like, no, we're going to say this, no, we're going to say this. And so they essentially came up with, and the Apostles' Creed for them was, he descended into hell. But really, if you go back to the early church dealing of it, he descended into Hades. He descended into the underworld. So a lot of your other Protestant churches, well, actually, if they do use it or they post it, they actually post it as that. Because we all agree Christ died. He all went to the realm of the dead. Yes, okay. We can agree on that, but did he go to hell? No. No, so this is kind of a bit of a misconception here that's going on with this type of thinking here. And again, if you don't realize it, a lot of your medieval churches, they hated Greek. They thought Latin was the language, and they didn't know Hebrew. So, I mean, they're kind of not working with the best stuff here. And then after more texts began to become available and people were trading text and like, oh, here's the Dead Sea Scrolls, here's all this, and now we got a wealth of these early manuscripts we can look back at and go, oh, no, it's really this. Oh, okay, that clears a lot of things up. But anyhow, so essentially he dies, he comes back again, and he's basically giving, and this is Isaiah here, and we have this sort of illustration in Isaiah, basically the servant being given the keys to the house, to the kingdom, understand? And so he's put it in an office in a position of that. This is talking about to the servant Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, and basically clothe him with your robe, and I bind and sash on you. Will commit authority to his hand to the house of Judah, keys of the house of David. He shall open and none shall shut, and he shall shut and none shall open. This kind of is a bit of a rephrasing later on when, again, we get the substitution for the keys of David and the keys of death. But essentially we take this to a future on thing here, and just to kind of bring it back into Matthew now, I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth, you shall be loosened in heaven. If you ask the Lutherans this means forgiveness. This means that, and this is why they do confession and absolution. This is why the Roman Catholics do it too. You get up there and you recite the Apostles' Creed, and then the priest or pastor gets up there and he goes, by the office given to me, by the Holy Spirit, I forgive you of your sins in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Because they basically take this as saying that essentially we are given the power to forgive. And by us forgiving, we are giving people the ability to go to heaven. Now, your Roman Catholics take it even one step further because they believe that if you die with sins on your soul, that you go to hell or go to whatever. You know, they used to do purgatory, but they realized, oh, that's not working anymore. People are actually able to read now. This is why, like, if you ever watch The Exorcist or whatever, and at the end, you know, they're like, would you like to make a confession, you know, as they're dying? Okay, we gotta confess. You know, that's why people gotta go confession all the time. But as we take this is actually basically what a lot of your Protestants, Baptists included, will say that no, this is basically the knowledge of salvation. You know how to save people. You know what saves people. Go out and tell people this is the Great Commission. You know this. If you withhold this knowledge from somebody, you are basically letting them go to hell. Okay? So it's kind of this idea of basically, look, no, you know the key to it. What is the key to it? Faith in me alone. Okay? Salvation comes through Christ alone. Go tell others so that they can have the keys to it. And so then, and again, this goes back to this idea of why does, okay, in the Old Testament, where did people go? Did they not have the keys or whatever? Well, if you go to Hebrews, it says, before the foundations of the world, Christ died for us. Well, what does that tell you? God doesn't have to sit around and wait. There is nobody has power over God. God can dictate when He wants, you know, He knows ahead of time where people are going. Why does He need to put you in a waiting room? Okay, He's not a doctor. He doesn't have to see one patient at a time. Okay? So, then the last little bit here we didn't get to, but I'm going to finish up the 7 churches with this. Going here, I know your works, you are neither hot nor cold. Would you that you were either hot or cold? So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Joey kind of referenced this some months ago. But this has actually a very real life scenario here. So if you actually look that the church here actually does not have its own sort of water source, fresh water source that's being in there. But the Greeks, and especially the Romans, developed great aquifer systems to be able to transport water. Well, actually here in Hierapolis, which is still there today, it's actually a hot springs. A lot of people like to go there and dip themselves in hot springs. Anybody been to Sulphur?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody drink the water that comes out of the Sulphur Springs?
Good.
That's right. Well, it's the same thing here. And I guarantee you, when John was first there and he drank that water, you don't forget that taste. And so the remnants of these well systems are still there today that you can go see. But essentially, the water is being pumped from up here in these hot springs, and it's being traveled down through these rock systems, and they're going to cool off. But are they getting cooled off enough like what you would like? No. So it's come out with as a very lukewarm. So it's kind of, imagine like if you're trying to heat up leftover soup in the microwave, and you think, oh, we got it. And then all of a sudden you take that stick and you're like, you know, you get that type of thing, you know what I mean? Like it's, the top is hot, but then the underlayer is cold, and you're like, man. I don't know about you, but there's very few lukewarm things I enjoy tasting, unless they've got a lot of sugar, like a hot brownie and cold ice cream mixed together, but it's not a great taste. So it's a very memorable thing. And again, he's using an analogy that these people would understand. And he's basically saying, this is you. Either, it's basically like the saying, get off, you know, poop or get off the pot. He's basically saying, get with it, go at it, full speed, or else just get out of here. Just get out, you know, completely. Because I don't want any half measures here. I don't want you wishy-washy. And essentially, to wrap all this up here with all these churches, essentially he's basically saying this. If you're with Jesus, then you don't have to worry about hell. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of those that persecute you. Don't be afraid of the world. Don't be afraid of the afterworld. You know what's going to happen. You should not, but you should worry about where others are going. That's what you should be concerned about. That's your focus here, and it's what he's trying to get people to do. Stop being lukewarm. Stop following false idols. Stop following these other false ideology. Stop being lazy. You know, you lost your first love. You're doing these types of things. Get back on the program and tell others. Go back to your first love. Go tell people about Jesus, essentially. I mean, that's the theme throughout the whole thing here. I mean, so in summary, here I've kind of dumped this. Some scholars see the churches as periods in church history. So there are actually people out there to say, oh, from 35 AD to 70 AD, the church was like Ephesus. And then from 70 to 200 AD, it's like, no, what a bunch of garbage. There is no way at all you can say that about the church. There is absolutely no way. You weren't alive back then. What did you go do? Take a survey of everybody? You couldn't have. Did you get in your DeLorean and go back? And I mean, no. It's a ridiculous idea, and you will see that in so many commentaries on this stuff that they try to have this church history period. It's like, no. It's essentially talking about churches, not just back then as individual churches, but individual churches today, the congregation as a whole, but also each individual made up in it. And guess what? Today you might be in Ephesus, tomorrow you might be a Sardis. An hour from now you might be a Philadelphia. Who knows? But you have, at some point in your life, have represented each one of these. At some point in your life, you've been one of these. And so, again, that's why I said here, they have these little dates here that they try to come up with as far as these are the time periods of the church. And really, their idea of this whole thing is basically, essentially, how is the church flourishing? Is it spreading? Oh, has it become basically a government-like, because under the Romans they basically turned it into the state religion? Oh, now you're no longer pagan, now you're Christian. Oh, okay. Doesn't mean people had the same knowledge of Jesus. They were just told by the ruling class, you're Christian. Get rid of your pagan stuff, now you're Christian. Okay. But, and again, here's kind of a map of the 7 churches. I put them there too, where they're located. Pretty close together. And here's Patmos, where John is writing at, so not too far away, really. But, I mean, I don't know about you, if you're 90 years old trying to swim there. I don't know. But, anyhow, and kind of some of the remains there. But anyhow, so, again, these are sort of the overall arcing themes of each one of them. And, yeah. So that's that. Okay, so now for what I wanted to get to today is now we're going to move into chapter 4 here. And in chapter 4, we're going to see how John repurposes an Old Testament genre that is called the covenant lawsuit genre. It's also called the covenant lawsuit treaty. So there's a lot of scholarship behind this type of going on. There's a lot of consensus with it. And in fact, what we're about to see here is a divine council scene being set up. For the studies on this, read The Prophetic Lawsuit in the Book of Revelation. That's by Alan S. Bandy. And again, I'll email you guys this as soon as class is done. This is a painting by William Blake. He's got a lot of paintings on Revelation. The other one is the Heavenly Court Judgment of Revelation 4 through 5. You'll be pleased to notice that these are also books that were written in Baptist seminaries. So if you're like, why are these coming from? Oh, okay, these are good old Baptist boys. So, then another one is, I think maybe I'll find it on Amazon still. This is her dissertation, Mira. But it's Trying Man, Trying God. Again, I'll send these to you soon. But what I want to start with is a bit out of Bandy's dissertation. And so what he does in this dissertation is he begins with discussing all the literature that has gone before, and then noting specifically writers as well that dip into the book of Revelation for this here and there. And then his work really goes into expand on the theme and really give it concentrated attention, specifically in the book of Revelation. So he goes through, in his introduction, lots of different approaches to this. And he basically points out the 5 points of the covenant structure. So all throughout the Bible, God is making covenants between man and himself. We go back and there's the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, the Davidic covenant. There's the new covenant when they go into exile. There's other covenants too with individuals as well, but essentially they all start out kind of the same exact way. And really your Ten Commandments kind of start out exactly the same way too. Really the Ten Commandments was this covenant between God and them. If you go read Exodus and go further into Leviticus in the explanation, you will see this. So the initial thing is a preamble to identify the king. We'll look at the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord thy God who brought thee out of the land of Egypt. Okay, he always identifies himself. I who I am. Then we have a historical prologue. Again, I'm the one who did this. I've done this. I am this. Whatever, these type of things. You've done this. Then we have these ethical stipulations. These are the terms. So basically, if you go back through it, and just let's take the Ten Commandments, for example. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Thou shalt not use the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. He's basically giving them these terms. Okay, this is what you need to do. All right? These are the rules to follow. These are the things. Then we have the sanctions. Now, we've heard sanctions all the time. We hear it in the news about sanctions on this nation or that nation. But essentially, they were the things of saying, okay, if you do this, this is what will happen to you. So if you follow these, I will bless you this way. If you disobey these ways, I will curse you this way. Then you have the succession of arrangements dealing with future generations. Again, God also many times in there says that this curse will be upon your children and those children, or this blessing will be to your children and their children. So it's basically saying that, hey, look, your screw-ups are going to affect future deals. Remember, the Israelites were in bondage for 400 years in Egypt. They were not supposed to stay there. And even Joseph warned them when on his deathbed, get out and go back to the land of our father. Get out of here. They didn't heed his warning. And a new Pharaoh came along, did not remember Joseph, put him in chains, put him in bondage. And we see this all throughout this. Oh, you don't want to take the land of Canaan? Guess what? Wander in that desert for 40 years. And your children are going to hate you. And they don't care. They'll go to battle. They'll be so sick and tired of manna and bitter water and wandering around in a desert that they'll be gladly to cross that Jordan and go in there. And we see this all throughout it. And there's a... Scrolling down here. And there's a technical term for this. The Rev. I know it looks like Reb there, but they pronounce it Rev. And that's a Hebrew term for lawsuit or a quarrel or a contention or a debate or something along those lines. So they're all synonymous with one another. You'd have God bringing a lawsuit, a rib, against the people for violating the covenant. So there are a bunch of these where God is the judge and the jury and the prosecutor. Either or all those parts or the majority of them. And in some of those, that courtroom is set with the divine council. It's the heavenly courtroom. You have the witnesses there, members of the heavenly host, that are part of the proceedings. So this is the backdrop to Revelation 4 and 5 we're going to get into here. And the letters to the seven churches also constitute a lawless speech. We see this in there. I will take your angel from you. I will do this. You have done this right, but you have done this wrong. I will do this if you don't fix this, and this will happen. Or you will be blessed if you keep up what you're doing well. Don't worry about it. You will suffer tribulation, but guess what? You will be rewarded. You're clothed in white. You'll be crowned. You'll be feasting with me. You have no more suffering, no more sin, none of these things. It's again, the seven churches really represent each one of these covenant lawsuits. So we already have an idea here. So this is not going to be anything new to the reader here. They're going to look at this and go, "Yeah, we get the idea, John. Okay, yeah, you've done it to us 7 times here." So even in the first 3 chapters, you have this, and the form of the letter generally distinguishes them as prophetic oracles, similar to the Old Testament prophets. So again, these letters themselves pattern themselves after things you'll find in the prophets. Again, the prophets were always bringing about these omens, these warnings against the people of not to turn away from this and come back to this. The book of Revelation follows that exact same thing. And John is going to be referencing a lot of these prophets when he gets into his own telling of the final judgment here. We're going to see a lot of correlation going back to prophets Daniel and Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Moses and so on. So he describes this a little bit, but he makes the point that the first two chapters have this dialogue between Jesus, and it sounds like the only thing that's happening in the dialogue, but later the proceedings here at and the content of some of these things are going to be transferred over or carried into an indictment of the nations. So again, this is going to be a setup of not just the people of Israel like in the Old Testament, but here in Revelation, it's going to be an indictment of the whole world. This is going to be of all the nations finally getting their justice brought upon them. And this also patterns, again, some things that come out of Daniel 7 here. And if you look here, there's going to be a lot of patterning here, and I guess I can pull it up here for our sake, but kind of show you, but essentially like Revelation 4:2. Well, let me go ahead and do some reading here of this, but we're going to see here that in Revelation 4, verse 4:2, that's going to mimic things from Daniel 7:9. And so is 4:3 as well, and we'll see that here in a moment. And in Revelation 4, verse 5, that again also goes into Daniel 7, 9, and 10. And also chapter 4, 4, and then in 6 through 10, that's also Daniel 10. So basically what is happening here is we're going to see this imagery being brought out of, in Daniel 7 here, a similar type of God setting up his courtroom that's going to also now occur again here in Revelation 4. So we're going to see a very juxtaposition here, very much of a likeness of these things coming about of it. So John is going to be borrowing heavily here in these chapters from Ezekiel and Daniel and Isaiah here as far as the setup of God's judgment and God's rulership and how he goes about carrying out justice, in other words. So now for what we're going to do in this part, we need to add some things because we're going to go into a few different directions here, but again tie it back to these scenes here, these divine courtroom scenes. To these items in Daniel 7, well, let me go ahead and read Daniel 7 here for you. So Daniel 7, 9 and 10. And again, this term here, Ancient of Days, it's going to come back again here in the titling of God here. As a look, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, we know about that, and his hair, the head was like pure wool. We've seen John already use this language early on. And his throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. So John is going to take from this scene right here and now bring it into Revelation here. And so, starting here in chapter 4 here of it in verse 1. After this, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and there the first voice. Let me bring. Yeah. Did I have that up here? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. After this, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and there the first voice which I heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was taken in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, and one seated on the throne. And he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian, And around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders, clothed in white garments with golden crowns on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. And before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was as if it were a sea of glass, like crystal. And around the throne, on each side of the throne, were the 4 living creatures full of eyes, in front and behind. The first living creature like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature like the face of man, the fourth living creature had an eagle in flight, was like an eagle in flight, and the fourth living creature, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and within. The day and night they never cease to say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who are seated on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, saying, Worthy are you, O Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. Okay, so backing up here, there's a lot to dissect here, but we're going to go through it, and I'm pretty confident we can get through it here. Well, where else does God live in the Old Testament? Okay, so we're looking here at this. So he set up this courtroom scene here. And let me first, well, actually, before I even get to that, the first initial part here we see is this, that basically, that we have here the first voice which I heard speaking to me like a trumpet. Now let me just stop right there and point out this. It says like a trumpet. He does not hear a trumpet. Okay? He's not hearing a trumpet. He's hearing a voice like a trumpet. Well, this actually has connections. And I actually want to take do kind of a bit of a sidebar on this here. Because we see John here mentioning that he's being taken up in the Spirit. Now, we're going to have a whole class, and it's going to be another one of those fun classes. I don't know if you've got it, you might throw things at me, but we're going to discuss the ideas of rapture and millennial kingdom. This is one of the arguments that people make for a pre-trib rapturing. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. We'll talk about that when we get to it. Because they see that John is actually being taken up, and he's about to witness all the things that are going to occur here on the earth, all the judgment being poured out. And people often take this and they say, well, see there, John's being taken up in the Spirit, and that's representation of all of us believers being taken up in the Spirit, and then God will carry out his judgment. The tribulation period will happen. Well, I just want to, there's kind of a bit of a problem with that argument. And again, we're getting into these different deals. Because those that hold to a pre-trib rapture add this thought to this. They say, well, this must be the rapture because on one hand they're thinking trumpet, and they're going to add this. This must be the rapture because the church, they argue, is absent from the rest of the book. What they're basically saying is the word church, ecclesia in Greek, is not mentioned throughout the whole entire tribulation period, the judgments. But hagios, holy ones and saints, is mentioned 13 times throughout the tribulation. And people, and them suffering through it. So, people who say, well, and I bring this up because you get a study like Ron Rhodes' study, and he argues that, well, the word church is not mentioned anywhere in there. But then you have your post-tribulation rapture people saying, well, wait a minute. The word saints, though, is, and who are the saints? Believers. And they're suffering here on. But there's a counter-argument to that, and they say, well, no, these are people who come to know Christ after the rapture.